more split level, but you know, again, I think you would have a much more successful campaign in the longer term if it really reflected both the sort of environmental and social justice aspects.
I'd just like to add a little bit from my own experience. I was also in college in the mid-1970s. I went to Princeton. In 1976 were the Soweto riots, where people suddenly realized outside of South Africa the real violence of apartheid, as these were brutally suppressed by the police and military. In the fall of 1977, the great leader Stephen Biko was beaten to death in a prison cell. That caused a huge ripple effect. We launched a divestment movement, and it intensified rather dramatically during the fall of 1977 and 1978. I have to tell you, it was an incredible education for me. It actually changed my life, because I was taking all these courses that never talked about corporate power, never talked about investment, never talked about global justice, didn't talk about anything that I could see happening with my own eyes. And yet my peers, students my age or a little bit older than me, seemed incredibly willing and knowledgeable to raise these important questions. I will say that the trustees of Princeton handled this very badly, so they didn't offer to meet with us. As a result, it escalated and eventually led to 220 students seizing and occupying the student administration building for 2 days, which had a big effect on the trustees. So hopefully you will make real progress along before you have to take that step. But it was a very, very dynamic time. Just to mention, it then went down a bit for a number of years when President Reagan was elected, and then came roaring back in 1985 and 86 during the declaration of the state of emergency. And then the next generation of students had a really powerful impact, building on what we had done, and then carrying it forward to the kinds of decisions that made a significant difference in South Africa at that point.
Okay, Ms. Blake, in theory, I really love these green revolving funds, you know, just these kind of sustainability-based initiatives that make you money. Can you give some examples as far as projects or initiatives that these take the form of?
So yeah, actual energy efficiency improvements on buildings, like technically. Lighting is probably the lowest hanging fruit at a university, and probably Tufts has done a lot of that, but there's always more opportunity, and technologies are always changing. LED lights in bigger areas and CFLs in residential. And then it really comes down, the bigger projects really come down to the facilities people at a university. So HVAC, a lot of the stuff I'm just starting to understand. Maybe Tina can even speak to this.
So Tufts has sort of the equivalent of a green revolving fund. It's different than the ones at other schools because it's just kind of run by facilities. So it doesn't have the sort of administrative overhead that green revolving funds do in a lot of other places, but it also doesn't have the participation from the rest of the university. And that would be nice. I don't know. So I'm Tina Wolfson. I work in sustainability. But so Tufts has been using this green revolving fund, I think I said, what, 10 years ago or something like that? Yeah, it's been going on for a long time, and they've used it to do all like lighting retrofits, and a lot of, like, Tufts is converted from oil heat to gas heat, and so it uses it for boiler upgrades and lots of stuff. The problem that we're having that Shoshana alluded to now is that all the low-hanging fruit is been picked, and so the returns aren't as impressive, is one way to say.
So then, as far as the above the low-hanging fruit, what do either of you like mostly advocate for, if there is one?
Well, so interesting right now. So all of you guys, on Friday next week, we're going to release the results from the working groups that the President's Sustainability Council has been working on, and so they actually, the energy section talks about like what needs to be done next, and it's really interesting because so much of it has to do with the process for how decisions are being made at school or anywhere. And how if you can catch a decision right at the very beginning, it doesn't have to cost more, and it can make a big difference. And so if somebody is, building a new building, if you change the decision-making structure so that you can build a really efficient building, then you don't need to invest money to get a return. It just works. And so I encourage you all to look at that. It's only about 80 pages. But the energy section is like 6. I don't know if that helps, but I think that might, and also in there will be like this gigantic list of all the stuff that's already been done at Tufts. It's kind of huge, but so that might be helpful.
Thank you.
And just as far as like smaller or longer payback time, something that comes down the road, renewables is obviously the ultimate, but I mean that's way further down.
We've had a hard time finding renewables that pay back.
Okay.
We've studied geothermal and solar. We're actually putting in a solar array. We're not going to own it.
And actually, Massachusetts has amazing rebates for solar.
Others non-tax free. And wind. We actually looked at a wind turbine in Grafton, but it was really on the edge of being worthwhile.
Are these going to be in that report? The kind of research you guys did for those projects?
It's listed as we did study.
Okay. Okay.
This is a question for Bob Massey. It's kind of a two-part question, all under the umbrella of, I guess, reasonable asks. When we had the board meeting this morning, board members brought up what you had brought up earlier, commingled funds and index funds. And so I guess the first question would be, how would we suggest to them to kind of get out of those or to make those more responsible investments? And then the second question would be, we're meeting with them again in a few weeks, and we'd really like to present to them a timeline. And given the complicated nature of commingled funds and index funds, what kind of timeline would you suggest is reasonable in terms of figuring out how to do that, and then asking for by this date we need this kind of thing?
For those of you who may not know what a commingled fund is, it is, let's say you have $100 million and you can't persuade anyone to manage $100 million, so you join with a couple of other institutions and put together an $800 million fund, and somebody says, I'll manage that fund, you can all put your money in it, it's kind of like an institutional mutual fund, but, and I'll follow your general instructions, but you can't tell me what I can buy and sell. So then you put your money in, but it's kind of locked in. And as was alluded to before, sometimes they don't even let you vote your shares, which is a key distinction. When you have a share, you're allowed to vote. So first of all, I just want to say it's a complete dodge. It's a short-term problem, it is not a long-term problem. Because the answer here is to get together with a couple of other universities, which, by the way, Nita Goodwin, who we talked about earlier, has been talking to other institutions, and create a commingled fund that's not in fossil fuels. And in case you wonder if that's possible, I want to tell you that, I think it was Morgan, maybe it was Chase Manhattan, I don't remember, one of the really big banks in the South African movement opposed divestment, opposed divestment, opposed divestment, and then when it became clear that a lot of money was coming online that wanted to be South Africa free, they took out a full-page ad in the New York Times and said, we are announcing our South Africa Free Equity Fund, or SAFE Fund. And here's the reasons why we are the leaders in the industry to manage your money. So as soon as they crossed the threshold from not possible, caused the destruction of capitalism, to enough money was being willing to do it, they suddenly became the experts and wanted to manage your money. And that's both a problem and a solution in that. So, so to answer your question, I would say to them, what would it take for you to establish your own commingled fund, a new commingled fund? And I'd go see Neva and talk to her about that. I think they'd be mystified if you said, we don't accept that argument. We think you can take steps. Now, in terms of timeline, when you look at the speed of degradation being caused by climate change, And you look at the fact that a few years ago, people thought it would be a generation before we lost the Arctic sea ice, and now we think it's going to be 3 or 4 years. It is incredible to me that 350.org has had the patience to say, all we're asking is stop investing in new fossil fuels and divest over 5 years. I mean, that's like almost right-wing Republican proposal. It's, I mean, I just want to say, it's unbelievably reasonable. If some of you read the article in Rolling Stone, I summarized my argument as dump the stock, like now. And I realize there are some impediments to it, but the principle should be 3 syllables, dump the stock. So I think that you come back to them and say, it's unlikely climate's going away, climate change is going, it's unlikely student concern is going away, this issue's not going away. The president I cited makes that point. So you might as well start managing this right now. We suggest through commingled funds, through agreeing to divest under the 350 terms, which are very reasonable, and set off a shockwave across the country. What Professor, gosh, I keep spacing his name, says is you can either lead or you can follow. This is not going away. And I think Tufts is in a great position to lead.
Hi, this question is for any of you who can answer it. Now, when Professor Adjaman was talking about how we can get involved with students, I know that he discussed how we can reach out to other groups that are not involved in the sustainability movement on campus. One of the things I'm wondering is because when I think of other groups on campus, I tend to think about a lot of the other social justice groups, like the Group of Six, and if you don't know what that is, it's like the LGBT group, the Women's Center, and a lot of the racial groups. Is there any way to sort of tie climate change issues into gender issues, race, class, and other things, even though ultimately it affects all of us, like everyone?
Yeah, as I said, it's all about how you frame the issue. You know, one thing about climate change for me, just talking generally, is it's actually not an environmental issue. It's a human behavioural issue. And therefore, if we think about it in that way, then really we should be getting psychologists involved in climate change. In fact, I was on a panel of the American Psychological Association looking at the psychologist's statement on climate change. Because climate change is the result of our addiction. It's not an environmental issue as such. It's an addiction issue that's played out through the environment. So that's the frame, though, that we give climate change. Is a very scientific frame. It doesn't touch everybody. Social justice frames, I think, are very, very effective at reaching out to groups who don't see necessarily the scientific or the technical message. So try that. Try thinking about, showing some of the other groups on campus that, what our investment is doing is basically compromising the lives of people already in this country and in other countries around the world. And those people are often low-income people, women looking after children. I think you can probably find ways, and I can supply you with information as well, how different groups are affected by climate change. So I think, look at broadening the frame of the message here. And bear in mind also, information alone does not move people. There's a big sort of set of studies now. WWF came out with a really amazing report on values and how appeals to values are often more important than necessarily fact-based or information-based sort of campaigns. So there's a group of us on campus, I think, who could help you think about how to broaden the message. And I'm more than happy to help with that.
Thank you.
I'd just like to underscore how critically important this is and how often it's overlooked. I think Bangladesh has 170 million people in it, which is half the size of the United States. Most of it is low-lying area. They're going to get hammered, are getting hammered by sea level rise and floods. That's just one place where poor and marginalized people are being exposed. It's true in the U.S. So I think this is a wonderful and critically important pathway. And Gillian, you said 3 points, and 4 points, and I wrote down 3. So I just want to broaden your base, faculty involved, the strategic